A ruthless gang harasses a helpless pregnant woman, but they had no idea her quiet husband used to be the deadliest killer in US Black Ops history. What happens next will leave you speechless. Odessa Rain pressed her hand gently to her round belly as the moving truck pulled away, leaving a cloud of dust on the cracked driveway. The house was old, worn down at the edges, and the neighborhood didn't exactly scream safety, but it was theirs. A fresh start. At least that's what she kept telling herself. Cassian Holt, her husband, stood silently behind her, eyes scanning the street with a stillness that always made her uneasy. Not because he was cruel or distant, but because sometimes he seemed like he was constantly preparing for something no one else could see. He didn't smile often, but when he did, it reached his eyes in a way that made her feel safe. Now, though, his jaw was tight. "You okay?" she asked, placing her hand on his arm. He nodded slowly. "Just, watching." They had left the city behind after a string of unsettling events, strange phone calls in the middle of the night, Odessa being followed once after work, their apartment getting broken into with nothing stolen. Cassian had insisted they move to a quieter place, a small forgotten town in Pennsylvania called Ashridge. Odessa agreed because she was 6 months pregnant and tired of the noise, the tension, the fear. Their new home was modest, 2 bedrooms, creaky floors, and a backyard overtaken by weeds. But to Odessa, it was enough. She planned to turn the spare room into a nursery with soft colors and hand-painted animals on the wall. She hadn't painted in months, morning sickness, stress, and exhaustion had stolen her energy, but here, she hoped to find herself again. The first few days were quiet. Too quiet, maybe. The neighbors didn't come by. No one waved. A group of teenagers lingered near the corner convenience store each evening, and every time she passed, they stared a little too long. One of them, tall, scarred, with pale gray eyes, smirked at her like he knew something she didn't. Cassian noticed too. "Don't go out alone," he said one night as they unpacked boxes in the living room. Odessa laughed. "It's a grocery run, not a battlefield." He looked at her then, really looked, and the laugh died on her lips. There was something in his eyes. Not fear. Not even worry. It was something colder. Older. Like a man who had been in too many battlefields to joke about them. "I mean it, OD." She nodded, trying to shake the sudden chill that ran through her spine. That night, while she slept, Cassian stayed awake, sitting at the edge of the bed, staring out the window into the dark street. Somewhere in the distance, tires screeched and a bottle shattered. And yet the town remained eerily silent. He muttered something under his breath. A name. A place. Maybe a memory. But Odessa didn't hear it. She just dreamed of a safe home, a warm crib, and a future where her baby would be born into peace. She didn't know yet that peace had a price. And her husband had already paid it, in blood. It was just past noon when Odessa Rain decided to walk down to the corner store. Cassian had gone to meet with someone about part-time work at a nearby warehouse, and the silence in the house was beginning to feel heavy. She needed air. Movement. A brief return to normalcy. She wore a light cardigan over her growing belly and tucked her phone in the pocket of her loose dress. The sun was high, the sky cloudless, but there was something oddly muted about Ashridge in daylight, like the town was holding its breath. As she neared the small store, the sound of music thumped low from a parked car. A group of young men leaned against the wall beside the entrance, laughing too loudly, smoking something pungent. She recognized them, they were always there. One of them, the tall one with the ghost-gray eyes and a long scar down his neck, stepped forward slightly when he saw her. Well, look what the wind dragged in," he drawled, his voice lazy but sharp. His name, she would later learn, was Rook. Not a nickname. His real name. Odessa kept her eyes down and moved to pass, but another boy, younger, wiry, with a toothpick between his lips, blocked her path with a casual step. That one was Tavian. "Hey, Mama. Where you off to so quick? He asked, his smile wide but empty. I just need to get some groceries, she said carefully, trying to move past. Then came the third, Skell. He was stocky, shaved head, tattoos crawling up his neck like vines. He let out a slow whistle. Damn. Baby bump and all. Where's your man at, huh? You shouldn't be out here all alone. Odessa's heart pounded. She felt the weight of their eyes on her, their voices wrapping around her like ropes. Every instinct in her screamed to leave, fast. But she couldn't show fear. She took a deep breath, trying to summon the same calm Cashin always carried. Excuse me, she said, more firmly this time, attempting to step through the gap. Rook moved in closer. Not touching, but near enough for her to feel his breath. You real pretty, he said low. That kid yours? Or someone else's mistake? Odessa's face went pale, and before she could respond, Tavian reached out and brushed her arm. Not hard, just a touch, but enough to feel like an assault. She jerked back, almost losing her balance. Don't touch me, she said sharply. And then, a voice from across the street. Hey! A man standing on a porch. Middle-aged. Balding. He didn't approach, but he stared at the group with a frown. Leave the lady alone. For a moment, silence. Just the wind and the slow grind of music from the car. Rook stepped back, grinning. Relax, lady. We're just being neighborly. They scattered slowly, like smoke. Tavian spat on the sidewalk before following the others. Odessa stood frozen for a moment, chest heaving, then quickly hurried inside the store. Her hands trembled as she gripped a basket. She wasn't sure what she even came to buy anymore. When she returned home, she locked every door. Then she sat in the kitchen and cried quietly for several minutes, biting her hand to keep the sound in. Later that evening, when Cashin walked through the door, she said nothing at first. He kissed her cheek and went to wash up. Then she spoke, voice low, broken. They cornered me today. Cashin froze. She told him everything. The boys, the words, the touch. When she was done, he said nothing. Just stood there. Still as stone. Say something, she whispered. His eyes were darker than she'd ever seen. His voice came out cold. I should have killed them the moment we got here. Odessa stared at him. He didn't flinch. Didn't blink. And for the first time, she understood, her husband had been built for war. And if these boys didn't stop, war would come to Ashridge. The days that followed felt like a delicate balance between silence and the threat of something worse. Odessa barely left the house. She kept the curtains drawn and locked every door, even in broad daylight. Cashin didn't press her for details anymore. He'd heard enough. Seen enough in her eyes. But she could feel something different in him too, something sharpening beneath the surface, like a blade being honed in the dark. At night, he would sit on the back steps, smoking quietly, not the cheap store-bought stuff but something rolled by hand. He'd watch the street with the kind of intensity Odessa had only seen once before, when he woke up screaming from nightmares he refused to explain. The third night after the incident, Odessa couldn't sleep. She wandered into the living room around 2 a.m. and saw the glow of the hallway light filtering beneath the bedroom door. Cashin wasn't in bed. She followed the light, and that's when she saw the closet door open. It was the first time she had ever seen the old wooden box. It was military green, dented, heavy-looking. Inside were a few items she recognized from his old life, a black combat knife, dog tags with worn edges, an encrypted satellite phone with no signal, and a tightly folded uniform bearing no name, no rank, just a dark patch with a symbol she didn't recognize. But what caught her attention was the small, velvet case. She opened it carefully. A medal, but not one you got for bravery. It was darker, more discreet. Cashin stood silently behind her before she even realized he was in the room. "You shouldn't be looking at that," he said, voice calm but heavy. She turned to him. "What is this, Cass?" He didn't answer. Instead, he walked past her and took the medal from the case. Held it in his hand like a stone. "I got this for a mission that didn't officially happen," he finally said. "I was part of a team that didn't exist. We were deployed where diplomacy failed, where silence was more useful than truth." Odessa's breath caught in her throat. "You killed people," she said. "I eliminated threats," he corrected. "Before they reached families like ours." She sat down slowly. "So what are you now?" "I was retired," he said simply. "Until Ashridge reminded me that evil doesn't need to wear a uniform to be dangerous." There was no anger in his voice. No drama. Just a truth spoken by someone who had lived too long in shadows. The next morning, Odessa woke to find Cashin gone. No note. No call. His side of the bed was cold. She panicked, clutching her stomach as she hurried to check the front door, locked. Car still in the driveway. Then she saw it, a trail of muddy boot prints leading out the back door. She followed them to the edge of the yard and noticed that they vanished at the fence. Cashin had gone out on foot. When he returned hours later, just after sunrise, his hands were scratched and stained. He washed them without a word. Odessa didn't ask. She knew better now. She noticed the knuckles of his right hand were split. That afternoon, word spread that one of the boys from the group, Tavian, had been found in a ditch behind the gas station. Not dead. Just broken. Ribs cracked. Wrist dislocated. A message carved into the wall beside him with a blade. "She is not alone." The police chalked it up to a turf fight. But everyone on that street knew. The man in the little house at the end of the block, the one with the pregnant wife and quiet stare, was no one to cross. Especially not twice. It was just after 7 p.m. when Cashin left for his night shift at the warehouse. The sun hadn't fully set yet, and Odessa stood on the porch, watching his car disappear down the street, her arms wrapped tightly around her belly. A quiet unease had settled into her bones, not fear exactly, but the sense that something was coming. Like the air before a thunderstorm. Back inside, she double-checked every lock, then made herself a light dinner she barely touched. She turned on a calming playlist and began painting again, her brush gliding across the canvas in gentle strokes. It was the first time in weeks she tried. Her therapist had once told her that painting might help ground her. But grounding doesn't mean safety. At 9:13 p.m., the music stopped. The lights flickered. A fuse, she thought, but the hum of the fridge was still on. It wasn't the power. It was deliberate. Her phone buzzed once, no service. Then came the knock. Not on the front door. The back. She froze. Another knock. Harder this time. Odessa backed away slowly, breath caught in her throat. Her hands instinctively went to her belly. Then, the sharp, unmistakable crack of wood. Someone was trying to force the door open. She ran. Not out the front, they'd expect that. She darted into the bathroom, locking the door and curling into the corner between the tub and the sink. She reached for her phone again. Still no signal. The emergency call failed. Voices echoed through the house. Male. Low. Laughing. "Where you hiding, Mama?" a voice sang. She knew that voice. Rook. Another voice joined him, Skell, sounding more unhinged, less controlled than before. "Should have left town when you had the chance." A loud crash rang out. The sound of glass breaking. Footsteps thudding across the hardwood. Odessa tried not to breathe. She pressed her hand over her mouth and prayed. From somewhere inside, she heard a drawer being opened. The rattle of silverware. Then a knife clinking against a counter. "Rook," one of them whispered, "I think she's in the bathroom." Her heart nearly exploded in her chest. Suddenly, a bang on the door. Then another. Then a heavy kick. The door cracked. "Come on now," Rook said softly. "You don't want us to come in angry." Odessa's mind raced. Cashin. If she could just survive long enough for Cashin to come back. Another kick. The door was giving in. And then, as if summoned from the shadows, a sound from outside. A car screeched into the driveway. Tires grinding pavement. Doors slamming. Silence inside the house. Then a voice Odessa hadn't heard in what felt like forever, Cashin's. "Step away from that door." The calm in his voice was terrifying. Rook laughed, but it cracked under pressure. "Or what? You gonna call the cops?" "No," Cashin said. "I'm gonna do what I should have done the first night." Then, chaos. Odessa heard screaming. The unmistakable sound of fists hitting flesh. Something heavy crashing. A body being thrown into a wall. One of the men shouted, "He's got a knife." Then, silence. 5 minutes. Maybe 10. Then a knock on the bathroom door. "Odessa." "It's me." She opened it slowly, knees trembling, vision blurry from tears. Cashin stood there, chest heaving, blood smeared across his arms and shirt. Not his. He took her in his arms, held her tightly. "I'm okay," she whispered. "The baby's okay." Cashin didn't speak. He just held her. In the living room, Rook lay unconscious on the floor. Skell had fled, leaving behind a trail of blood out the broken back door. Cashin walked over to Rook, pulled out a small black phone from his pocket, not his regular phone. One with no contacts, no apps. He dialed a number, said 3 words, "It's done. Clean up." Then he hung up. Odessa watched him as if seeing him for the first time. "You have people?" she asked softly. "I used to," he said. "Sometimes, when you've buried enough monsters, they owe you favors." That night, the bodies vanished. No police report. No trace. No news. And in Ashridge, silence once again returned, but this time, it felt different. Like something ancient and deadly had stirred. And decided to stay. The morning after the attack was eerily calm. Odessa sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in a blanket, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea she hadn't sipped. The bruises on her arms were faint, but the fear still lingered under her skin like a fever. Cashin stood silently at the kitchen counter, watching the window as if the house were under siege. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Odessa whispered, "Are we safe now?" Cashin turned to her, his face unreadable. "Not yet." She wanted to press him, to ask what that meant, but the look in his eyes told her he was already calculating something. Something dangerous. Cashin didn't sleep that night. Instead, he made phone calls on the same untraceable black phone he had used after the attack. Every call was brief. Names were never spoken, only codes, dates, and locations. Odessa overheard fragments. "Package is secure. Possible retaliation in 72. Zero tolerance." Cashin didn't want to scare her, but he didn't lie to her either. "Skell got away. He'll come back. And next time, it won't be just him." "What will they do?" she asked. "They'll try to prove something. That they're not afraid of me. That I bled." "And what will you do?" Her voice was small. Cashin stared at her for a long time. Then finally said, "I'll remind them why they should have been." By sundown, the trap was already being set. Cashin spent hours preparing, moving furniture, setting up wireless cameras he retrieved from a locked duffel in the garage, reinforcing windows and door frames. Odessa helped where she could, though every movement was slower now, heavier. The baby had started to kick more, almost as if sensing the unrest in the house. Before midnight, Cashin disappeared again. This time, Odessa didn't ask where. He left no note. Just the quiet click of the front door. He walked the streets of Ashridge like a shadow, dressed in black, blending with the darkness. He wasn't hunting, not yet. He was watching. Studying. Every alley, every window with a flickering light, every passing car. And then he found it, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, where flickers of movement danced behind shattered windows. The place reeked of gasoline and rot. Inside were 5 of them. Not just Skell. Others too. Bigger. Older. With more to prove. Skell sat on a makeshift throne of crates, arm in a sling, his voice slurred with pain and rage. Guy's a ghost. Just disappears. But he bleeds. That's all that matters. A man with a long beard and broken nose scoffed. So you want us to go after his wife again? That's your plan? Skell leaned forward. No. We don't touch her. We make him watch. That was all Cashin needed to hear. He returned home before dawn, blood on his boots, but no wounds. Odessa met him at the door, worry in her eyes. He kissed her forehead gently. They know I'm coming now. That evening, the lights in the Holt house went dark. Cashin sat in the living room with Odessa resting on the couch, a pistol within reach, his eyes on the front door. He wasn't afraid. He had lived through jungles and deserts, watched friends die, killed men who were considered ghosts. But nothing, brought out the monster in him like the thought of someone harming his wife or unborn child. And when the night finally broke open with the sound of tires screeching outside, voices yelling, and footsteps rushing toward the house, Cashin stood up slowly, cracked his neck, and whispered. They came to see death. I'll show them what it looks like. They came just after 2 a.m. 2 trucks pulled up without headlights, their engines rumbling low like wild animals in the dark. Inside the Holt house, the lights were off, curtains drawn. To the untrained eye, it looked like everyone was asleep. Vulnerable. That was exactly what Cashin wanted them to think. Odessa sat in the nursery, cradling her belly, the door locked from the inside. She didn't argue this time. She knew better now. Cashin had given her a silent nod before leaving her there, a pistol placed in a drawer beside the crib. Only if you have to, he'd whispered. Outside, 6 men stepped onto the lawn. Skell was one of them, his sling gone, pain masked behind layers of bravado and adrenaline. He held a crowbar in one hand, a cigarette in the other. The others looked like hired muscle, rough, scarred, poorly trained but dangerous enough. They didn't come to scare. They came to finish something. Front and back, Skell ordered. Quiet. Quick. No guns unless you see him. And don't touch the wife. Not unless I say. 2 men peeled off into the dark toward the back of the house. The remaining 4 crept toward the front porch. One reached for the doorknob. It turned freely. Unlocked. That should have been the first warning. Inside, it was silent. Too silent. No creak of floorboards. No startled voices. Just an empty, breathing darkness. They stepped in one by one. The first man, tall with a serpent tattoo on his throat, didn't even see it coming. As he moved into the foyer, a cable tightened around his ankle. He tripped, and the moment his body hit the floor, a flashbang grenade hidden under the entry rug exploded with a deafening bang. White light swallowed the room. Screams echoed. Cashin struck like a ghost. The second man never saw the combat knife until it was buried in his thigh. Cashin's movements were a blur, efficient, merciless. He used the wall as leverage, twisted the knife free, and slammed the man's head into the banister with a crack that silenced him instantly. Skell staggered back, blinded, trying to draw a weapon, but Cashin was already moving. A shadow in the chaos. From the rear of the house came yelling. One of the men had kicked in the back door only to find himself in a hallway full of wire traps. The second tripped and fell hard, dislocating his shoulder. He crawled backward just in time to see Cashin materialize in the doorway. "You really thought you could walk into my home?" Cashin growled, voice low and controlled. The man lifted a pistol, but Cashin kicked it from his hand, grabbed his wrist, and snapped it without hesitation. Skell, still dazed, tried to escape. He stumbled out onto the front lawn, screaming for the others. One man made it out with him, bloodied, limping, breath shallow. They ran to the truck. But the tires were already slashed. Cashin stepped out onto the porch. The porch light flicked on. He stood there, shirt torn, blood streaked across his arms, expression carved from stone. Skell turned to him, chest heaving. "You're insane, man. This ain't war." Cashin didn't move. "You made it war the moment you came after my wife." Skell reached for something in his waistband, a small pistol. Odessa watched from the nursery window. She saw her husband raise his hand, not with a weapon, but with something small and metallic. A remote. He pressed the button. A flash of light exploded behind the truck, the sound of a second flashbang device concealed under the rear tire. Skell and the other man screamed and fell, ears ringing, completely disoriented. Cashin walked slowly toward them, every step like the toll of a bell. "You wanted a monster," he said, kneeling beside Skell, who was coughing, trying to crawl. "I buried men in 6 countries, Cashin whispered into his ear. "And I never lost a night of sleep. You threatened my wife. My child." He pulled Skell's own gun from his belt and dismantled it in seconds. "I should kill you." Skell sobbed, shaking. "Please." Cashin looked down at him, breathing heavily. Then dropped the gun parts beside him and stood. "You're going to disappear," he said. "You and anyone you ever ran with. If I hear your name again, even once, I won't just come for you, I'll erase you." Skell nodded frantically, blood dripping from his nose. Cashin turned and walked back toward the house, the porch light flickering behind him. By the time he stepped inside, Odessa was already there, standing in the hallway with tears in her eyes. He said nothing. Just pulled her into his arms and held her. That night, the Holt house stood untouched. And every house on the street burned with quiet fear, not of the gang, but of the man who had ended them without mercy. Ashridge would never be the same again. The sun rose quietly over Ashridge the next morning, but it did little to warm the cold that had settled over the town. Word spread faster than any police bulletin ever could. 6 men entered the Holt property that night. Only 2 limped out. No one knew exactly what had happened. There were no sirens, no arrests, no investigations. The official story was that a burglary attempt had been thwarted. But the residents of Ashridge, those who peeked through curtains or watched from their darkened porches, saw more than enough to understand. The house at the end of the block was no longer just a house. It was a warning. Inside, Odessa sat at the kitchen table once more, but this time, she wasn't shaking. Her hands were steady as she sliced fruit. The baby inside her kicked softly, rhythmically, as if sensing the world around him had changed. She hummed a quiet tune, something her mother used to sing, as sunlight poured across the kitchen floor. Cashin came in from the backyard, dirt on his boots, sleeves rolled up, eyes still sharp but calmer. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't tense. He wasn't listening for footsteps or checking windows every 5 minutes. He kissed Odessa on the temple. "I'm planting a fence line," he said. "Real one. Reinforced. Nobody gets close again. You really think they're gone? She asked, without looking up. He nodded. They know better now. But what if they don't? Cashin hesitated. Then spoke with quiet certainty. Then I'll bury what's left of them in the woods. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise, and not one made in anger, but in love. Later that day, an unmarked black SUV appeared at the edge of their street. It parked there for only 10 minutes. Odessa watched from the nursery window, holding the baby monitor in one hand and a folded baby blanket in the other. Two men in suits sat inside. One wore sunglasses, despite the overcast sky. The other typed something on a tablet. Neither exited the vehicle. Cashin stepped onto the porch and looked directly at them. The SUV drove off moments later. That night, after Odessa fell asleep, Cashin retrieved the black phone once again. He dialed a private frequency. A voice on the other end answered. Holt. Cashin's voice was low. They sent a feeler. Black Suburban. 2 operators. There was a pause. Then, not agency. Not ours. Private intel firm. Could be cleanup. Could be interest. Do you need extraction? No, Cashin replied. Not yet. Understood. You're still on the dormant list, but you're lighting up radars. I didn't have a choice. You never do. Cashin hung up and stared at the phone for a long moment before locking it in the safe bolted under the floorboards. In the weeks that followed, Ashridge changed. The store clerk started to smile at Odessa more. Neighbors left casseroles at the door. A man who had once ignored them on the sidewalk now waved every morning, eyes wide with nervous respect. No one spoke of the Irons anymore. The gang that once ruled the streets had vanished like mist. Their names went unspoken, their symbols scrubbed off walls, their presence erased. Cashin returned to the warehouse job, part-time. Odessa resumed painting, her studio finally filled with canvases again, images of light, warmth, and peace. One morning, as Cashin watched Odessa stretch her arms above her growing belly and laugh at something the baby had just kicked, he allowed himself a thought he hadn't dared entertain in years. They might actually make it. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, a rare smile touching his lips. There would always be shadows in his past. There might still be danger ahead. But for now, in this moment, he had everything he'd once believed he never deserved. A family. A home. And something worth living for. The first snowfall came earlier than usual that year. Ashridge lay quiet beneath a soft white blanket, the town moving slower, calmer, like it, too, was learning how to breathe again. The house at the end of the block no longer looked haunted. Odessa had painted the porch a warm shade of green, and wind chimes now hung near the front window, tinkling gently with every passing breeze. The garden Cashin planted had long since gone dormant for the winter, but the fence he built stood tall and firm, wrapping around the house like protective arms. Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon and cedarwood. Odessa stood in the living room, one hand resting on the curve of her stomach, the other cradling a small folded onesie. The nursery was finally finished, soft tones of pale blue and warm beige, with hand-painted murals of animals sleeping under moonlit skies. A rocking chair sat by the window, already worn in. Cashin entered quietly, holding 2 mugs of tea. He moved differently now, still vigilant, still precise, but the tension in his shoulders had eased. He hadn't touched the black phone in weeks. It remained locked away, buried beneath layers of other lives, the kind of life he once thought he'd never escape. They called again, he said, handing her the mug. Who? She asked, already knowing. The agency. Or what's left of it. They said I've got clearance to come back. Odessa paused. Her heart fluttered, but not with panic. Are you thinking about it? Cashin shook his head. Not for a second. He moved to the window, watching the snow fall over the yard. I used to be good at vanishing. Slipping through the world unnoticed. But then I met you, and for the first time, someone saw me, not the killer, not the shadow, but the man under all that. Odessa joined him, slipping her hand into his. You were never invisible to me, she said softly. Even when you tried to be. They stood there in silence for a while, watching the snow build up along the fence, the way it softened the world. Later that night, Odessa's contractions started. Cashin remained impossibly calm as he always was in crisis. He carried her to the car, drove through the snow-covered streets with the same laser focus he once used in combat zones. By the time they reached the hospital, she was already in active labor. The hours were long and grueling. Odessa screamed, wept, laughed deliriously. And Cashin never left her side. He held her hand with a gentleness that didn't seem possible from a man who had once broken bones with the same fingers. He whispered to her, steady and strong. You've survived worse. You're stronger than you think. I'm right here. At 4:27 a.m., their son came into the world, crying, pink, and alive. They named him Elias Holt. Cashin held him first, his hand surprisingly steady, even as his lips trembled. Odessa watched him, the man who had once been a weapon, now cradling something more fragile than anything he'd ever protected. I'll never let anything touch you, Cashin whispered to Elias. Not while I'm breathing. A few days later, they returned home. The snow had thickened, but their home glowed from within. Neighbors dropped off baby gifts and homemade meals. People who once avoided eye contact now smiled and waved. Life wasn't perfect. Shadows would always linger. Cashin knew better than to believe in fairy tales. But he also knew peace didn't mean the absence of violence, it meant the presence of something worth fighting for. And now, he had two reasons. Odessa lay asleep on the couch, Elias curled against her chest, breathing slow and steady. Cashin sat nearby, watching over them both. Not as a killer. Not as a soldier. But as a father. As a man finally at peace. And when the wind whispered against the windows and the snow continued to fall, the house stood firm, warm, and unshakable. Because no matter who came to Ashridge next, they'd never be ready for the man who now had everything to lose. In the end, Ruthless gang Harasses pregnant woman, unaware her husband is a lethal killer, is not just a story about violence or revenge, it's about transformation, love, and redemption through purpose. Cashin Holt, a man forged in shadows, was never truly alive until he had something fragile to protect. His past, though steeped in darkness, becomes a weapon of light when turned toward defense instead of destruction. Odessa, through her quiet strength and unwavering love, doesn't just survive, she softens the edges of a man who was once nothing but sharpened steel. What makes this story powerful isn't just the justice delivered to those who deserved it, but the quiet decision not to let the past define the future. The real victory isn't that Cashin defeated the gang, it's that he chose to stay. To build. To be a father. It's a reminder that even the most broken men can be rebuilt, not by war, but by love. And sometimes, the most dangerous man in the room, is the one who chooses peace.